Mary Giuffra. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Serge. How are you?
Good, great.
Good.
So, how did you come from traditional couple therapy to biological couple therapy?
Well, I have had a really interesting history. I started as a labor and delivery nurse, and the reason for that is because I always liked working with healthy people. And I never liked the focus on pathology. That's just been something, maybe because my mom was a psychiatric nurse, and I never liked that pathological focus. Mm-hmm. So I always looked for, the health in people. And so within nursing, labor and delivery was a very healthy place, generally speaking. It was life beginning.
Yeah.
And I worked with couples and I taught about it. And what I saw was the dynamics going on, and I didn't understand them. And I wanted to know more. So I went back to graduate school. I studied at Nathan Ackerman Family Institute and at Center for Family Learning in New Rochelle to understand what was going on with couples. And when I went to Ackerman, it was a more experiential, Ackerman-based. And I felt I needed a theoretical orientation to guide me.
Yeah.
So I went to Center for Family Learning in New Rochelle, and that was a Bowenian-based on Murray Bowen's work. And Murray Bowen, interestingly enough, way back in the 50s, described his work as biologically based. And a lot of people don't know that, but he really did. He talked about the triune brain, the three brains, the cerebral cortex, our executive, the mammalian brain or limbic system, which is, the emotional brain. And he talked about the reptilian brain. He didn't especially talk about trauma and fight-flight, but he did talk about the three brains. So that gave me an orientation that was very systemic. So in those days, when a couple would come in those days still, I not only see this couple, but I kind of know them as part of an energy field, a field that includes their extended families, and their extended families through the generations. And I'm very aware of the impact of wars and traumas and various kinds of racism and every other kind of ism and on individuals and their experience. So it's not just them, it's their life history.
Yeah. So in other words, from the dealing with couples, already a sense in Bowen that it's not just what traditionally was called psychological,
Absolutely.
but seeing people as animals, as living beings, as biological, neurological. And also seeing a system, not just each person, but each person as part of larger systems, a previous family history, the traumas, what happens in the world, and so that would make a natural link between family therapy as a system and biology.
Absolutely. And fascinatingly, I worked with that for a long time, and what I felt I needed more of, I was doing great with the system, but I felt I needed to do in depth with each couple as well as the system, not only back in terms of their extended family, but how that extended family affected them, not just in terms of triangles, but, over closeness and that kind of thing, but also in terms of how did it affect them specifically. So I went on and I studied addictions for about a year, and I did that because I felt it was an issue in every family, and I thought it was related, and I wanted to see how to put it together. And I could see how the addictive process operates in all families. I mean, addiction is just a way of avoiding life. It's closing off sensations and feelings. And that was very biological, so that was taking much more into the biological. And then because of the addictions, I realized that the spirituality aspect seemed to help people dramatically. And, through 12-step programs, higher power. And so I felt I could see the intergenerational, the systemic. I could see the spiritual. But and I certainly knew the emotional because I had, a more traditional training early on. What was missing was the body. And so I felt I needed to get back into the body. So in my own educational background, I then studied core energetics originally, and it certainly got me into the body, and I tried to relate the body to the family. But then after that, I studied somatic experiencing, and that to me pulled it together. Because what that brought in was the idea of trauma, and how trauma has such an impact on our nervous systems. And not only our trauma, but the trauma that our parents experienced, and that our grandparents experienced, and that our great-grandparents experienced. The trauma, until it's worked through, remains in our body and in our DNA. So a couple walks into the room, and I have a whole lifetime and many lifetimes right there in the room for each of them. And they're not just responding to one another, they're responding to programming that has a long history.
So I want to just stay there for a moment, because it's a very powerful thing. Is when we see a couple, we tend to be drawn into the drama of the concept, the situation that's bringing them right there, into the intensity of their struggle or suffering. And the point you're making is actually, when we see them, we're not just facing that, but we're facing a whole history that's very much present and through their body.
Absolutely. Just last evening I saw a couple, and she was kind of shut down, and I talked about what she needed, and she said she needed her husband, to say hello to her when he came in. And so, he kind of was willing to do that and so on. But as we talked more and more, what happens is, if he doesn't, it brings her back to the time when she was a little girl at home, and her dad was an alcoholic, and he would come in, and everyone was focused on him, and her mother was focused on him, and she was feeling neglected. So she's here in the room with her husband. He just comes in from work and is preoccupied because he's had a bad, challenging day. And she's back in the past, a little girl who's really wants someone to say hello, to make contact. And that brings in the work of Stephen Porges and the dorsal vagal ritual.
So I want to just stop here just for a moment. When you see the person, this woman, she sees her husband, and he brings her back into that situation in the past with her alcoholic father.
Right.
So that's where maybe there is a similarity with the trauma model, the trauma way of thinking, and things like overcoupling, and how there are connections between past and present events.
Absolutely. Because just to give you an example, when she started talking about it, he kind of got a little bit frozen, shut down looking. And so what I needed to do then was say, we'll be back with you, Jane. I'm going to go now and talk to Joe. And so then I said, Joe, what's going on? And I tried to make eye contact, because it's really important to get that ventral vagal contact. And there are times, and I will, even with permission, ask her to put her hand to the shoulder, or even I might do it, with permission. And touching a person like that on the shoulder is very grounding. And if that's not appropriate, then I, even in my intent, will put my intentional hand on his shoulder, if you know what I'm saying. But that will kind of ground him, or even your foot against their foot. And that will ground him, and he will then, when you say what's going on, and he will take a deeper breath and begin to connect on a ventral vagal, on a social regulating nervous system level. Look at you and stuff, and then he'll calm down, okay? And then what just happened? So then you ask him, and you say, well, I feel what are you feeling right now? Well, I feel a tension in my chest. Okay, and as you feel that tension, what happens next? Well, it goes into the back of my neck. Okay, well, let's hang out there for a while. And it's okay. It feels a little heat. Okay, what now? And it's kind of going into my arms. Okay. And is there something your arms would like to do? It's like, his hands are making a fist. I say, there's something your arms would like to do? And he could just feel that. He said, I just feel so... And then his hands go kind of up in what in somatic experience we would call a defense-orienting posture. And so his hands are towards me, and so I will say, okay, Joe, now let's just be curious and see what your hands are trying to tell us. They're communicating. Body language is a form of communication, so let's let them talk. We'll be curious.
Yeah.
And at the same time I'm working with him, I'm looking at Jane to see how she's doing. And she all of a sudden is really interested and involved and looking because he's talking about himself, he's into himself, so that's what she wants. So she's really very interested, and it's not about her. When they're in a couple situation, if it's about the other person, they can be defensive, but this is focusing on the individual, on her husband.
Yeah.
And so as he does that, he puts his hands and he just really does it, and then he gets an image of when he was a kid, and his mother criticized him a lot, and he would walk in the door and she always had some kind of a complaint. So he, got in touch with that and sort of went through this kind of physically, his body pushing his mother away. I don't mean just in his mind's eye and feeling it in his body. And then there was kind of a little vibration as he discharged, and that passed. And he took a deep breath and he felt better. And his wife looked, her eyes got wide. She felt, and she kind of smiled and felt some sense of love towards him, and they connected. So
great. What
was the issue was really her individual issues about her father, the drinking and the lack of attachment when she was a little one and people didn't fuss over her. And his was back to when he was a kid and walked in and people were on his case too much and he wanted them to leave him alone. So nothing to do with one another, but they were kind of living out experiences that hadn't been completed in their past. And so it's a way.
So I want to just slow down a little bit because I think that it was a really beautiful, beautiful vignette you were giving, and maybe it makes sense to underline a couple of things. How first. You didn't jump into having them argue or discuss or, deal with the ostensible situation, but you were focusing on noticing whether or not they were grounded.
Absolutely. And if I let them just get into this arguing, this disagreement, which is what they do at home, they would have both their nervous systems would have gotten very activated, probably ungrounded, and it would have been leading to it was same old, and so they don't come to the therapist's office to do the same thing they do at home. You may let them run through it once to see how the process works, but once is enough. They just don't come to the office and keep fighting and fighting. That just is not in anyone's best interest. It just overloads their nervous system and doesn't help anyone.
Yeah, so it's absolutely not, continuing that pattern, but really going into a different pattern where you're really, and I think you're very insistent on the idea that nothing can happen until they're grounded.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you just made an interesting point, Serge, where you said it was a new pattern. And not only is it a new pattern, but it's also a new pattern in the brain. Because the old pattern is, she does this, he does that. We would call it the Murray-Bowen two-step. Same old. You move in, you move out. But in this case, what you're doing like a pre-prodromal change so that they're going to have a new pattern operating, a new channel in their brain. So there's an option. They have an option. They don't have to just respond in the same old programmed way. They can have a new program and a new way of responding. It's kind of like learning a new skill.
Learning a new skill, developing a new capacity of the nervous system. And I want to underline another part again. This vignette was really beautiful as you were describing how you were working with the men. You were helping him emerge out of that freeze state.
Yes, because if someone is in a freeze state and then the other party starts either getting angry or saying, tell me you love me, it's just never working. So you have two very frustrated people. He's getting more and more frozen and she's getting more and more frustrated. which will make him more and more frozen. So it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Sometimes what you need to do, and when I describe the two of them, if she's really, really activated, his wife, very angry or very upset, I'm going to have to work with her first. In this case, she wasn't that angry, just a little bit, but if the person's really getting very activated, you deal with the person who's the most activated first to kind of calm her down a little bit. Mm-hmm. Then I'll go to, in this case, the husband, and you try to connect with him, just kind of make some kind of human connection that feels safe. So one would be just to be present and to look at him. He may be able to make eye contact. And if I can stay really calm, it's kind of like when a baby gets really upset. Mm-hmm. Hold them on your shoulder gently, and they're hysterical. But if you can stay very calm in your system, their whole being goes, ah. And it's sort of a parallel. But in this case, there's the freeze that's added to it. So, and with the freeze, you just help them to feel safe. And the way to get safe is to come from that sort of survival mode of fight, freeze, and just get them back into contact with you is one way. And then once you get contact with them through eye contact, through touch on the shoulder, a foot next to a foot, whatever, then they can get in touch with that frozen fight response, or that frozen flight response, or that frozen, in the case of this fellow, it was that frozen defensive orienting response where he needed to sort of ward off his mother. His body wanted to say, stay away.
Yeah. So again, in that very nice, vignette you were doing, you were describing how, having gotten in contact with him and having, created more safety, you were able to not only observe his body language and his movement, but get him to experience them in such a way that he was able to experience this defensive orienting and the warding off of the attack from his mother.
Right. Exactly. And it could have been that what was frozen was his anger at his mother. And that may be underneath. And then he would just feel that, and I don't mean in a cathartic way, getting very angry, because that would overload his nervous system. And he has a nervous system that can't get that activated. That would be kind of like putting 220 voltage into 150 wiring. Mm-hmm. So very gently, in a very slow, titrated way that he feels contained, he would begin to feel it. Or he might even say, well, what was underneath is that once he walked into the door, what he really wanted to do was to run out. Flee. And so in that case, you could say, okay, just imagine yourself running. Feel it. Mm-hmm. Feel your legs running. You feel the wind on your body. And where would you go? Would you run to the beach? Yeah, I'd run to the beach. And so he would run to the beach and would feel that deep breath.
Mm-hmm. And so as you did this process with him, you were able to make visible what is going on during that typical interaction.
Yes.
And also to in a way elicit its meaning.
Yes, exactly. In a very calm, quiet, non-reactive way, because if he started getting angry or wanting to run and she thought it was about her, his wife would get very, very active. You get two highly activated people in the room. So it's important. It's not doing individual therapy with two people. That's not what this is about. This is doing couples therapy. Individual therapy is not the same as couples therapy, because individual therapy would be just doing this therapy in this with this person and therapy with that person. But when you have two people in a room, you have a new system. You have a couple system that has its own life, that has its own programming, that has its own reactivities. So whatever is going on with him, you need to watch continually to see how it's affecting her.
Yeah, so what the sense I have, as you're describing this process is something that I would call parallel processing. You process one, the other is there, and as each person is able to be grounded and present, there is the possibility of learning from what's happening to the other, so that it's not individual therapy, but it's not arguing, it's really that something happens to one and the knowledge is transferred to the other and enriches the situation.
Absolutely, and what you just said is key, Serge. Something happens to one and the knowledge is transferred to the other. And the issue is, because they have a life history together and an established system, that knowledge is transferred in a variety of different ways. It may be transferred emotionally, and through an emotional way of frequency. It may be transferred intellectually. It may be transferred somatically. So he feels him in her gut, or she does something, and he shuts down. He can just feel himself holding his breathing. And it's much more intense with a couple that would be two friends. Much, much more intense.
Yeah.
Because of the physiologic connections, and the connections they have are so intense, and you have two families merging, and so that you now have all of the intergenerational issues from those systems impacting on this system. So to do individual work with a couple, I think I'm not the only one. There's been a lot of research that 80% of therapists do individual therapy and only 20% are trained to do it. And that causes a lot of issues. I see a lot of clients who are in a really bad place because of things that have happened in the past. So it's real important for the couple to be seen as a couple, as a whole system intact. Anytime anyone says he's a good one and she's the bad one, you're caught, man. It's no longer systems. Right. It's no longer systems work. If you define good guys and bad guys or right and wrong, you really don't have a system, because systems are reciprocal. I mean, the nature of a system is that it's interconnected. One underfunctions, the other one overfunctions. That's just how systems work. So the systems piece is key for me. And the physiologic system is even more complex.
Yeah, so that's the crucial variable compared to the traditional couple therapy is you see the system not just on a psychological level, but also on that neurological level.
And the family and neurologically, even the family systems in terms of attachment and so on. A love relationship is certainly, it's all about attachment, trying to connect. And so the patterns of connection in the extended family will come out with one another. And And in the example you described earlier, that vignette of these people you saw last night, it was very clear how in your work the patterns of attachment in the original family are very present in the moment, and very present at the level of how each person reacts, their body language, and their nervous system reaction, very much in the consulting room at the time you're with them. Right. And one of the things as well that I find a lot when I'm with a couple, you can sense them getting stressed or activated just a little bit, or kind of a little shut down. If I work very hard to stay present, and I try to connect with them on that level, it's not necessarily verbal. But if I try to do that, it's the same thing as with anyone, with children. When there's an anxiety in the room, if you can modulate your own nervous system, you can calm down that nervous system. And for some of these couples, it's the first time they have felt contained. They grow up in very chaotic families, and so people fight and they carry on. And so to be able to feel very upset and to be able to contain that upsetment, and that someone else is there, not trying to fix you, not trying to take it away, but trying to be present and to try to hold the container for you to feel that, then the couple will calm right down.
Yeah. So very important for the therapist to function as a calm container.
Absolutely. And that's the whole thing with your own countertransference kind of thing. If a couple is doing some behavior that kind of is similar to something with you and your partner or something for your family, and you identify with one or the other and you try to fix it, in that way, then you're not going to help. You need to hold, contain, and help them to do it. Their body knows what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Not, I don't know what to do. Their body knows what to do. I can be a coach and help them to do certain kinds of, exhibit certain behaviors, like slow it down a little bit, or, getting them off the intense focus on the other party and say, so that's real, like for instance, if the husband comes in and he's not dealing with his wife, he just wants to talk about the children, then you say, so rather than getting caught up in talking about the children, is as you talk about little Johnny, what happens to you? What's your fear? What's your greatest fear around that? And what happens? You take that back, and invariably it goes back to something in his own family. Invariably.
Mm-hmm.
It may be a little different code, but it's similar. For instance, I remember having a couple, and his wife, they were newly married, and the wife got very angry about something. She was from a kind of family where people let it all hang out. And as soon as she did that, he shut down immediately and said, I want out of here. Well, he had a mentally ill brother, about 9 or 10 when it started. And so whenever he sees this kind of out of control behavior, it may not be that out of control, but anything, he just freaks, and it takes him back to the trauma of his mental brother, and he alone with this brother. So then I had to deal with him around the trauma of that and help her to see that it wasn't about her, it was about what this triggered in his patterning.
Yeah. So really a sense of how everything is multidimensional.
Uh-huh.
And through this process of containing, of slowing down, of paying attention to resonance, to the inner experience, that's a way to deal with all these dimensions in a way that's very manageable and organic.
Absolutely. And the couple feel more contained when they leave the office. They're not going to go outside and start fighting. They may start fighting the next day, and then you'll deal with that the next week. But they've learned, they had the life experience of sitting in their own space, sitting in their own body, having a different opinion from someone else or a different feeling from someone else, and knowing that it's okay. You can feel that. The other person can feel it. The whole world doesn't come to an end. No one dies, and you can experience it. So it's sort of, the more you can do that, the more you expand their capacity to experience emotions, feelings, sensations, life. The more you can slowly take in a very titrated, focused way, life experience with rage or happiness, because people have as much trouble with good feelings as they do bad ones. That's why they have good sex and a fight the next, little while. Mm-hmm. It's because the good feelings are too intense. Their wiring is not quite able to deal with such intensity. That's why they distance and go off some. So you kind of have to begin to help them to kind of rewire so that their wiring expands more and more to take in more and more and more of life.
Yeah. So your role as where you see your role as in biological couple therapy is to expand the capacity of each person and of the system to absorb the intensity of things that have to do with attachment.
Right, and of life, and whether it's the happy, wonderful, or the sad, and it's in just life. It's, I guess it's attachment, but it's just the living experience of what goes on, and the fact that people are different. One of the things about is defining yourself is very important. So many people think two become one, and clearly two are always two. become one in the sense of a new system, but you have to maintain your individuality or you're submerged in another person and you lose yourself, and that's not healthy for either. One gains self and then the other loses self. Not good for either. And that's a way of avoiding the growth that we need to do. Who am I inside? And I'm not all wonderful. I have two sides. I have a very loving, nice side, and I have another side. And it's all part of who I am.
Yeah.
So,
So, I have a sense that, in a way, part of this whole process is also helping growth in the sense of helping each person deal with that dual role of being both a member of a couple and an individual, and being able to see the differences between me and the other person.
Absolutely. And I think, it's my own personal belief, I think that a couple relationship is just a great opportunity, challenging, but a great opportunity to grow. Because in friendships, you can be the way you want to be. You can just go to level 4 and be level 4. That's who I am. That's the kind of person I am, and the other person agrees with that. When you get into a couple relationship, it's becomes so much deeper and so much just biologically closer that you're forced to get in touch with the other aspects of yourself. With a friendship, if a person brings up a part of yourself you don't like, you can distance from them for a while or forever. But with a couple, if they bring up a part of you that you have trouble with, it's harder to run away. It's there. It comes back every day to hit you. So it really forces you to see who you are if you allow it to. And I think intimacy, I don't think it, people say, that intimacy is really, the more intimate you are, it's not just about a sexual intimacy, it's about emotional intimacy, a spiritual intimacy, an intellectual intimacy, emotional, that to be able to share all of who you are with another person. The more you can share who you are, the bad or the unpleasant as well as the pleasant, the more intimate you become. People think, some couples think, well, when you just say, oh, wonderful things, I love you, and it's, well, that's not it. That's a piece of it. But the part where I don't feel so good about you, I don't like you so much, I don't like myself so much, that's the other side. To be able to contain that and have a large enough container of love to experience that. I mean, we certainly have that with children growing up. They'll say, I don't like you. My teacher is nicer than you are. Right. And yet you still love them, and you hope that. You don't say, oh, you like your teacher. Well, hopefully you do. It's the same thing with a couple, that you can hold, not to be cruel, but just to contain the truth of who one another, who you are. Not in a cruel way, not to say something just to hurt, but to say something to own it for oneself.
Yeah. So that's really a help on this growth process of increasing the bandwidth for intimacy.
Right. And one of the important things I also do with couples is really to teach them how to regulate their nervous systems. Because we're not in the office and they're at home, I will encourage them to teach them in the office, but practice at home. When they start feeling activated, when their heart rate starts going up, or they start getting a pain in the back of their neck, or a headache, or they can feel themselves just contracting or holding their breath, then what they need to do, no matter how much the other person wants to chat and continue the discussion, they need to say, look, I'm going to take a time out, and I'll be back. You need to come back within 20 minutes. I'll be back in 5, 10, 15, or 20. And then go by yourself, rest yourself, and then come back. And then you're in a better position. And couple do that. Someone was in the other day, and he was saying that he was, with his partner. In this case, they're not married, but he was with his partner. And she started saying things, and he could just feel himself getting very activated. His nervous system, he could feel his body in the shift. So he said to her, look, excuse me for a second. And he went inside, and he waited, in this case, I think 10 minutes, and he came back, and they had a really good discussion. If he had stayed, there would have been a blowout. People, if you just say, I need to get a glass of water, sorry, I have to go to the bathroom, do whatever you need to do, or just say I need a time out. But it makes such a dramatic difference, because if one of the partners is starting to get really activated, if they can contain it, it's fine. You kind of know people. But if they start getting that, they just start losing it and getting ungrounded and losing their ground and losing their sense of containment, then it's all the energy is coming up, and it's going to come out. Or it's going to in, and it's going to freeze, neither of which are particularly, or they'll go out, and they kind of dissociate. So the important thing is for people to learn how to study their own nervous systems and their own bodies, and to learn how to regulate it, and to learn how to say, okay, how do I soothe myself? How do I soothe my nervous system? Well, I think of I think of the beach. I think of sailing. I think of skiing. I think of my children. How often I'll do that. Another couple I talked about in the book, and he comes in and he starts getting very, very angry at his wife, and she starts freezing. And her eyes get kind of glassy, and she just withdraws and doesn't say a word. She's just sitting there. No one's home. And so what I'll say to her, and what I have done is, hey, Lucy, how did the tennis go? How did the soccer go with the kids? And and she immediately, and she talks about the game and the kids and the soccer, and she's back again. So it's just when you get stuck in a place, don't keep at it.
Right.
Go to another place that's pleasanter.
Go where there's movement and where there's life, instead of staying stuck.
Activity. Just go off to another channel. That's a pleasant channel.
Yeah. So, Mary, as actually we're coming to the end of the conversation, is this a good place to end, or would you like to add something to as an end? Well,
I guess the one thing I would like to say is that on my website I have this as well. I have 4 comments which I feel really strongly about. One is define yourself or be defined, and that's really important. If you're in a relationship, you better say who you are, what you feel, what you think, or someone else will define you and tell you what you think, what you feel, who you are. So it's really important. Nature abhors a vacuum. So space is important to define yourself, but you also need to fill that space with who you are. So it's define yourself. And I also talk about relationships are serious adventures for adults and not Disney rides for kids. It's not you live happily ever after. It's hard work. But growing and becoming a person is hard work. Becoming a professional is hard work. Why wouldn't being a human be hard work? Fun sometimes, but hard work sometimes. And the other one is pause, leave space. And that's really, really an important piece. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is just leave a little space between you and the client, between each other, and taking time is part of that, that leaving a little space. But leave some space, internal space as well as external space, taking a breath, going inside, breathing, is creating a little more space so you're not so constricted, whatever the drama du jour is. And then finally, what I talk about, which I feel so strongly, is our body is our greatest database. Our body contains our life history, our ancestors' life history, and also human life history, our evolutionary life history, and we're really complex beings with very rich, deep life histories. And we need to respect that. It's not just emotional. It's not just attachment. It's not just cognitive. It's a very, very rich life history. And we need to be sensitive to it and hold it in really a container of love and peace as much as we can, and resonance.
So, Mary, just as I'm hearing you talk about these points, and especially the last one, I have a sense of maybe a different approach to the concept of biological couple therapy and the word biological. And at the same time as there's a very practical or scientific sense in it, I also get a sense of spiritual in that, because it's a sense of being part of something larger, and larger than the psychological issues, but something that's encompasses all of our humanity and history.
Yes. And when you think of it, if you go out to space, the Earth is just a little globe, and the further out one goes, the smaller we become. And the unity of it all, the unity, and that's why I say the system, to just look at one person apart from from the partner, apart from their environment or their family or their culture, is, you do have to zero in sometimes, and you can focus in depth. One of the reasons I got into this body work is to do that, to try to take that systems down and ground it. And to me, that's what you do. You take all the vastness of life and ground it into that body, which is really grounded into the earth. It's funny, I'm studying biodynamic craniosacral therapy, and one of the things they talk about is that there's a notochord when we're in embryologic development that develops right through the center of our body, an energetic notochord. And from that, everything develops. And so we talk about that from the heavens, the sky, right through the being into the core of the earth. And so we're kind of like held here on this planet through this grounding, this magnetic pull of the earth. And then we're also suspended in this larger, vast universe. But body is our container, and that's our ground. And so that's why, for me, that's just the most exciting place to focus on.
Great. Thanks, Mary.
Very welcome, Serge.
This recording is part of the Somatic Mindfulness and Relational Psychotherapy podcast. See the website relationalimplicit.com.